kinontra at hinimok ng Office of the Prosecutor ng International Criminal Court o ICC na tanggihan at huwag aprubahan ang hiling ng kampo ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte para sa kanyang interim release o pansamantalang paglaya habang nagpapatuloy ang investigasyon sa kanya. The prosecution respectfully requests that the chamber reject the defense's request for the interim release of Mr. Duterte. Saad ng Office of the Prosecutor sa isang 15 pahinang dokumento na may petsang June 23. Giit ng mga taga-usig na hindi nararapat ang interim release dahil sa bigat ng mga kasong kinahaharap ni Duterte kaugnay ng umano'y mga krimen na may kinalaman sa against humanity sa ilalim ng kanyang war on drugs. Ayon sa Office of the Prosecutor, kinakailangan na mapanatiling nakapiit si Duterte sa ICC detention para matiyak ang kanyang pagdalo sa mga paglilitis at masigurong hindi malalagay sa panganib ang investigasyon at hindi siya makagawa ng katulad na krimen. Inilahad din ng prosecutor na nananatiling maimpluwensya si Rodrigo Duterte dahil may malakas umano itong political network at international connections. Isa rin sa mga nakalahad sa naturang dokumento, sinabi ng Office of the Prosecutor na may kakayahan umano si Duterte na makialam at takutin ang mga testigo kung sakaling payagan ang pansamantalang paglaya nito. Ipinunto rin ng prosecutor ang kasaysayan niya sa paghihikayat sa extrajudicial case at pagsuway sa ICC. Bukod dito, nakasaad din sa request ng prosecution na may history si Duterte at mga kasamahan nito ng pakikialam umano sa investigasyon laban sa dating Pangulo. Ang dokumento ay pinirmahan ni ICC Deputy Prosecutor May Mandiaye-Niang. Pinasinungalingan din ng prosecutor na hindi sila kontra sa interim release. Matatanda ang kamakailan lang nang kumpirmahin ng legal counsel ni Duterte na naghain sila ng interim release sa ICC. Ayon kay Kaufman, sinunod daw lahat ni dating Pangulong Duterte ang lahat ng proseso hanggang sa ma-detain siya sa ICC, kung kaya't maaari siyang humiling ng pansamantalang paglaya. Wala pang inilalabas na desisyon ng ICC, ngunit inaasahang maglalabas ito ng pahayag sa mga susunod na araw. Samantala, sa panayam kay Vice President Sara Duterte sa isang rally sa Melbourne, Australia, kinumpirma niyang may 2 bansa ang nagpahayag ng kahandaang tumanggap kay dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte. Ito ay kung sakaling matuloy ang pansamantala niyang paglaya mula sa International Criminal Court o ICC. Sinabi ni VP Sara na isa ang Australia sa mga bansang ikinukonsidera ng defense team ni dating Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte bilang posibleng tumanggap sa kanya sakaling aprubahan ang hinihiling na interim release.
Yes, yes sir. If you can check the ICC website, there is a request for interim release filed by the defense team of former President Rodrigo Duterte. And if you can read through the redacted portions, you can see that there are 2 countries that was named there, and one of the countries committed to helping or to receiving and accepting former President Rodrigo Duterte.
Gayunpaman, nilinaw ni VP Sara na hindi pa raw siya maaring maglabas ng anumang sensitibong detalye ukol dito.
Unfortunately, sir, I cannot talk about the contents of that petition. Only the lawyers of President Duterte can talk about the request for interim release because some portions of that, particularly those items that were redacted and considered as confidential, can only be between those who have a privilege, lawyer-client privilege.
Ayon kay Vice President Sara Duterte, target ng mga abogado na maisakatuparan ang pansamantalang paglaya ng dating Pangulo bago sumapit ang Setyembre.
I asked the lawyers for the timeline of the interim release, and months was the answer, ma'am, not weeks. Months was the answer, but they wouldn't give a definitive timeline, but they said they're hoping to do it before September, and they're in a rush because of his age and his health condition.
Ibinahagi rin ni VP Sara ang tungkol sa kasalukuyang lagay ni Duterte. Anya, labis na raw itong pumayat at tila apektado ng klima at pagkain sa kanyang kinaroroonan.
What is his condition physically and mentally?
You haven't seen him this thin. before. I don't think he's ever been this thin since maybe before his marriage. So he's thick thin because of the lack of appetite and because of the weather. It's very cold for him. He's not used to the cold. And I think it's the way that they cook the food. It's not really traditional Filipino food. But I'm happy that he gets rice every day. But yes, he's given milk as well if he doesn't have the appetite to eat.
Kasalukuyan pa ring nakadetain si Rodrigo Duterte sa The Hague, Netherlands dahil sa kasong against humanity. Nakatagda ang kanyang confirmation of charges hearing sa September 23, 2025.
You must be heaving a big sigh of relief because this when the defense had released its petition, you were taken aback.
Yes, certainly, because their submission seems to put that the prosecutor had already agreed with them and that there was already a country committed at least to host him during his interim release. It felt as if it was a done deal or something that is, in Filipino, we call it arreglado na. But now, thanks for the clarification from the Office of the Prosecutor, apparently, this was a bluff and the prosecutor has called it.
Can you cite it is heavily redacted and was just released hours ago. May you cite, it refers to some talks between the prosecution and the defense, precisely on where he can be taken. So may you cite this portion to us?
Yes, although I would not like also to fuel the speculations regarding the country, and I will put this out in advance that there is, earlier in the day, there were talks that Australia was being asked or Australia was being explored as a possible host country or receiving country for President Duterte. But apparently, so here's the thing, the Office of the Prosecutor initially, as the prosecutor also said, initially had talks with the Duterte camp about interim release, but only to a particular country. And this particular country, redacted, this particular country, the court has had experience with or a long-standing commitment and cooperation with. So this is a country probably that the court has already made the same request of, to host a detainee, to hold them temporarily during interim release. And now it appears, so there were initial talks, but they did not finalize anything. And now the prosecution says the defense has gone ahead and even changed the country in its application. And it's saying, which is true, we cannot comment or we cannot commit to any proposal if it is not yet on paper. And the only time it was on paper was during the defense filing. As it turns out, the prosecution was, in a way, caught blindsided when the defense says, oh yeah, we already agreed. But it turns out the defense changed the country, and the prosecution is vehemently against transfer to that particular country because it appears there is no history of transactions with this country as to detainees. And
but there was an initial agreement. There was an initial agreement as to a particular country. Talks.
Yeah, I would put it more like that. And I'm even thinking that it could have been an offhand discussion. I mean, you talk about, how about interim release? Are you okay with that? Maybe the prosecutor said, well, before we had the interim release of this and that to this country. Maybe just that. And I don't know, it appears that even the defense team, the legal team, has had this proclivity for disinformation, and that's pretty sad because apparently from that side of the fence, then now who do we trust?
Will you have an opportunity to weigh in as well in this request of interim release by the defendant?
Yes, although technically we have not yet been ordered or been asked to comment as victims, as is usual with the Office of the Prosecutor. They will, with the pre-trial chamber, they will order parties to comment. The Office of the Public Counsel for Victims, which stands now as the sort of temporary representative for victims, while the legal representatives have not yet been appointed. The OPCV has committed to submit representations in behalf of victims. We are coordinating with the OPCV for the submission of the views and concerns of victims.
So, masaya ka ba sa sagot ng prosecution?
Sa isang
Prosecutor,
banda,
rather.
oo. Sa isang banda, oo. Pero syempre, nakakaalarma pa rin na parang initially, may pag-uusap. Doon kami na na paisip na bakit may ganitong usapan na tungkol sa interim release. But on the whole, the document actually points to so many reasons not to grant him interim release as a matter of principle. And I put in, so you've mentioned already yung appearance niya, and then he questions the legitimacy of the court. His appearance might not be ensured at the next hearing, and then yung obstruction or endangering witnesses. There's a third, the third point is very parang mapapaisip ka, no? It's very chilling because it cites Duterte saying that as soon as he is elected mayor of Davao, he will double the killings in Davao. So parang, ha? And the prosecution says, well, and then the defense says, tingnan nyo, wala namang namamatay. Sabi ng prosecution, oo, kasi nakakulong siya. And, kumbaga, with a view that if Duterte is released and assumes office as mayor, then maybe he will be true to his word to double the killings there.
At which point, Attorney Conti, do you think nahihingan kayo to weigh in on this case in terms of you being, or the office of representing the victims? At some point soon?
Yes. Actually, to be frank, we have initial and internal deadlines. It's this week. We're just waiting for official communications from the OPCV about this submission.
So ready na yung dokumento, hinantay nyo na lang nahingin, and then you'll just send it?
Yes po. Sa part naman namin, kasi hindi naman, again, we're not the prosecutor 2.0. So itong mga argumento ng prosecutor, hindi naman namin kailangan ng ulit-ulitin pa. Ang mas importante dito, ano yung pananaw ng mga biktima. At para sa kanila, talaga namang nakakatakot ang paglaya niya at may potensyal na patras yung ibang gusto pang magtestigo laban sa kanya. Very material yun, lalo na dito sa panahon na, kasi nasa ano pa lang tayo wala pang, kumbaga, kaso talaga. Wala pang charges. The charges will be read in September. And so technically, the prosecutor can really still build up the case. And the deadline for disclosure of evidence is in 6-7 days on July 1st. That's the deadline for the general disclosure of evidence. And then the charges, ang tawag natin sa Pilipinas yung information, kumbaga, itong araw na ito, ikaw ay nagkasala. The charges are due to be released on July 4th. So we're eagerly awaiting that to see if all this have had any impact.
Would it be
will that be heavily redacted too?
Possibly because on the part of witnesses and perhaps incidents. So anything, nagre-redact kasi sila ng kung ano man na palagay nila makakakompromiso nung seguridad ng tao. Dito actually sa redactions dito, seguridad ito nung kapamilya at mga posibleng mga kilala ni Duterte na pupuntahan So, hindi ko muna i-disclose kung siya pupunta. And then pangalawa, dun sa mga witnesses. Kaya dito, kumbaga, dahil hindi pa naman sigurado, kung ano man, hindi muna nila ipapaalam. Sa bahagi ng information, palagay ko sigurado sila sa kung anong krimen. Yung mga pangalan lang siguro ng pinatay, ng mga witnesses na nakakita, yun ang posibleng i-redact dito.
In terms of chronology, attorney, do you expect na hihingan muna kayo ng, yung weighing in ninyo or imposition ng victims about this possible interim release bago, lumabas yun, yung information, yung presentation of charges, etc. Which means dapat next week na. Diba?
Well, yeah, iniisip nga na, actually this week na yung internal deadline namin na pag-uusap namin sa OPCV. I guess they're going to also submit this week. The thing is, if you look at the technicalities, if you look at the rules, the court is not required to ask for the views and concerns of victims. Kumbaga, hindi absolutely required. We were required in the question of jurisdiction. So, dito sa jurisdiction, anong views and concerns? We've already submitted that. Pero for interim release, the issue is about security and about the prosecution and the defense. Sila yung talagang, kumbaga, magkausap dyan. You know what? We're waiting for, usually the court sends out an order, di ba, na, okay, these are the deadlines for the submissions. The court did not because, unfortunate for Duterte, I don't know if they figure this out. The judges of the ICC had their annual retreat right after they filed. The defense filed. They were in Germany for a good part of last week. So, napaisip nga kami na anong nangyari? Bakit hindi nag-order yung judges? Yung pala, talagang may annual na
Bakasyon
vacations.
din sila. Kumbaga.
Oh, actually, it's not a vacation in the sense na parang enjoy. All together, meron silang annual retreat sa Nuremberg. Ito yung scene ng
Nuremberg.
unang
Saan yung trials? War trials.
Oh, wow.
So, hindi siya bakasyon, kumbaga. It was
Parang
also a learning.
internalization of their task, I would
Correct.
suppose.
And in
The
their
heavy
press
tasks
statement,
ahead of them. Yeah.
yes, and in their press statement after their retreat, they were mentioning that, now that we have re-imbibed and we are reinvigorated with the spirit of the Nuremberg trials, we will proceed henceforth with our work in the ICC.
Per attorney, going back to the interim release, how do you think the court will weigh the reasons cited by the prosecution, which really centered around Mr. Duterte being a flight risk, kumpara doon sa mga rason naman ng defense, which cited yung humanitarian grounds, yung edad po niya, yung health niya. So kumbaga, ano po yung magiging mas matimbang?
I would say the ICC will decide on una jurisprudence, what it has already. Una yung batas. So it's the Rome Statute, and both the prosecution and the defense refer to articles. So doon nakalagay kasi yung parameters kung kailan papayagan yan. And then secondly, sa jurisprudence. And jurisprudence is parang the history of how the court has interpreted the law, these articles. And so there were several mentions of in these cases, in a previous application, ganito yung ginawa namin, dito din ma-apply. And for me, having looked through the information available, it weighs against the Dutertes kasi hindi pinapayagan ng interim release sa ICC for those accused of crimes against humanity, war crimes, etc. Yung pinayagan lang so far ng ICC ay yung ang kaso ay parang obstruction of justice kung tatawagin, Article 70. Kaya mabigat, walang precedent, and from what we say, diba, parang walang nauna, first time ito kung sakali. And then second, as to, you mentioned na parang humanitarian and parang medical, heavily redacted yung part na yan. Hirap na kami, parang ano bang naintindihan? Pero it would appear that even the prosecutor is not convinced. And if the prosecutor is not convinced that whatever condition, medical or kung ano man yan, is, kumbaga, requires that he be let out of prison, then unlikely that the court will also be convinced.
All right. It's been just a few hours, but I'm sure you've talked to, the families of victims. And how has their attitude been to this new bit of information?
Nagka-messagean kami and para sa kanila, ay, thank you Lord.
Kasi nagduda kayo nung una, no? Medyo tinabahan kayo.
And in fact, at one point, I really thought it would be about 50-50 because if you have all the elements present, the prosecution agreeing and a country volunteering to host him, then parang baka baka pumayag yung court kasi ariglado na. But for the victims, thank you Lord lang, nagpapasalamat sila because from their point of view, the release of Duterte in any way, shape, or form is certainly, kumbaga, it forebodes additional deaths, killings, and hark back to the killings that they've experienced. It's re-traumatization. And on their part, as victims, who could also be qualified as witnesses, it's disincentive for them to come forward if the accused is outside and can freely mingle with his associates. The word associates is heavily mentioned also in one portion of this document. Kaya napaisip ako na talagang ano yun, material for the ICC that an accused is not allowed to, kumbaga, reignite the passions of his supporters or of his team, yung parang yung mga co-conspirators niya or co-perpetrators. So, we're just a little bit concerned because the prosecutor appears to agree in principle na doon sa isang bansa. But then, on the whole, we think this request, we're more positive now that this request will not be granted. And anyway, it's just 3 more months.
Thank you so much for your time, Attorney Cristina Conti, ICC Assistant to Counsel.
Mag-subscribe at i-click ang notification bell para sa mga susunod na video updates. Maraming salamat po.